It was a bitter January night in New York City, the kind that chokes the streets in ice and fog. Snow lined the sidewalks like forgotten ash. The wind howled low and sharp across the Hudson River, moving water like a slow exhale in the dark. Somewhere in that vast city, a young man stumbled out of a crowded bar and vanished. His name was Patrick McNeil, a 21-year-old college student at Fordham University. He was smart, ambitious, studying to be a physical therapist. That night, he had gone out drinking with friends. The bar was on the Upper East Side, a familiar spot, nothing unusual. Patrick was drunk, not dangerously so, according to those with him, just enough to slur his words, enough to make his walk a little crooked. When he left the bar around 2 a.m., he was alone, swaying, heading south on 86th Street. He wasn't supposed to vanish, but he did. Security cameras caught a glimpse of him. Wobbly footsteps, unsteady path. Then a dark van slowly following behind. Nobody noticed it at the time. Not the bar staff, not passersby. Only later, much later, when retired NYPD Detective Kevin Gannon reviewed the tapes, did anyone catch it. For 2 weeks, Patrick was missing. Flyers plastered across lampposts. His face shone on the news. Police treated it like a missing persons case. Friends and family waited, searched, hoped. Then, in early March, the Hudson River gave him back. Patrick's body was found floating near the Brooklyn Pier. He was face up, arms crossed neatly over his chest, as if placed there, not by nature, but by human hands. The official report? Accidental drowning. He had fallen into the river, they said, maybe disoriented, maybe too intoxicated to realize where he was going. He tripped, slipped, sank. Simple. Case closed. But to Kevin Gannon, nothing about it was simple. He had seen drownings, hundreds over the course of his career. He knew the pattern, the science, the chaos of it. Bodies don't surface like that. Not face up, not with arms crossed. Water is unforgiving. It bloats, twists, distorts. It doesn't return people looking peaceful. There was no water in Patrick's lungs. His body showed signs of chemical burns, marks on the neck, possible ligature impressions. None conclusive, nothing enough for a murder charge. But for Gannon, they were signs, clues, breadcrumbs. He couldn't shake the feeling. This wasn't a boy who drank too much and fell. This was a message. Gannon had promised Patrick's parents at the funeral, "I will not let this go. I will find out what really happened to your son." What he didn't know was that Patrick's death wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. Over the next year, Gannon would begin seeing patterns, cases that echoed Patrick's. Young men, white, college students, all vanished after nights of drinking. All later found in bodies of water, rivers, lakes, canals, and then the graffiti, a crude, spray-painted smiley face. Near the locations where several of these bodies were found, someone had left a mark, a round face, 2 dots for eyes, a curved line for mouth. It was simple, innocent-looking, but Gannon saw something else, a symbol, a signature. The deeper he looked, the more he found. Dozens of cases, dozens of young men, from New York to Minnesota, from Wisconsin to Ohio. They all fit a disturbing profile. Male, college-aged, athletic, white, found in water. And always there was an eerie detail, a missing item, a lost shoe, an oddly preserved body, a location that made no sense. Sometimes there was a smiley face, sometimes not, but the connection felt undeniable. Gannon brought in Anthony Duarte, another retired NYPD officer. Together, they began combing through death records, case files, autopsy reports. They mapped the bodies. They drew lines. They saw something emerging, a possible network, a pattern of targeted killing. And that terrified them, because if they were right, it meant something horrific, that someone or several someones were hunting young men across multiple states, undetected, undeterred, and hiding behind a smile. The press didn't care. Police departments brushed it off. The FBI wasn't interested, but the detectives kept digging. Patrick McNeil was no longer a lone tragedy. He was the first known victim of something much, much bigger. To Gannon and Duarte, his death opened a gate into a nightmare. They called it the Smiley face killer theory. And what they uncovered next would send shockwaves through the true crime world and spark a debate that continues to this day. Was there really a serial killer network roaming the country? Were dozens, maybe hundreds, of young men murdered in a secret, coordinated effort? Or was it all coincidence? Pattern seeking in the chaos of tragedy? As Patrick's grieving family laid him to rest, those questions still hung in the air like the winter fog that night in Manhattan. Unanswered, unsolved, waiting, just like the river. The first time Kevin Gannon spotted a second case like Patrick McNeil's, he hesitated. When he found the third, he was convinced. This wasn't coincidence. This was a pattern, and patterns don't lie. Gannon had spent decades on the force. He knew how random the world could be. But this was too clean, too consistent, too deliberate. It started in his apartment, a modest, dimly lit space in the Bronx. There, the former detective pinned maps to his walls, strung red thread from state to state, and combed through boxes of news clippings and autopsy reports. Missing person posters, police case files, waterway maps, obituaries. He started marking every case he came across that resembled Patrick McNeil's. The similarities were chilling. Young, male, athletic, college student, disappeared after night out. Body later discovered in water. And then he found Chris Jenkins, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Halloween night, 2002. Chris was a senior at the University of Minnesota. A good student, captain of the lacrosse team, beloved by friends and family. That night, he dressed up for Halloween, a Native American costume, complete with moccasins and faux feathers. He went out with friends to a bar in downtown Minneapolis. But something happened. Witnesses say he was kicked out of the bar after an argument. Alone. No coat. Temperatures well below freezing. He vanished. For months later, his body surfaced in the Mississippi River. Face up, still wearing his costume. Arms folded across his chest like a corpse laid for burial. Authorities called it accidental drowning. No foul play. Another drunk college kid lost in the cold. But Gannon disagreed. He met Chris's parents, studied the autopsy. There were bruises on Chris's hands, defensive wounds. His body showed no signs of the decomposition expected after 4 months in flowing water. There was no water in his lungs. That meant one thing. He didn't drown. He was dead before he hit the water. Then came Dakota James, Pittsburgh, January 2017. Dakota was 23, intelligent, ambitious, working at a law firm while earning his master's degree. He was bright and driven, with his entire future in front of him. On the night he vanished, Dakota had been out drinking with co-workers. Security footage later showed him walking alone through the city, confused, disoriented, as if being followed. His phone was never recovered. 6 days later, his body was discovered in the Ohio River. The cause of death? Drowning. But again, Gannon saw more. There were ligature marks around his neck. Faint, almost missed. Scratches on his inner thighs. Linear abrasions that didn't fit a drowning profile. And then, near the riverbank where his body was found, a smiley face, painted in red, dripping. At first, Gannon thought it might be a coincidence. Graffiti was everywhere. But as he kept digging, he saw the symbol appear again. In case after case, it was always there, near where the bodies were found, spray painted on bridge supports, tunnel walls, trees, sometimes fresh, sometimes faded. He and Duarte began collecting data. They created a list, a spreadsheet filled with victims. Each entry told the same story. Young, athletic, often popular men, missing after a night of drinking, last seen alone, found in water days or weeks later. But there was more. Tommy Booth, 24, Pennsylvania, 2008, disappeared after leaving a bar. Body found 2 weeks later in a creek behind the bar, an area already searched multiple times. Shoes placed neatly beside him. Smiley face nearby. Brian Welsian, Chicago, 2000, disappeared on New Year's Eve. found months later in Lake Michigan. Toxicology showed GHB in his system, a date rape drug. Again, the smiley face. Each time, the circumstances echoed the last. The bodies looked posed, phones gone. Sometimes wallets, sometimes shoes. Always something missing. Too many parallels. Too much precision. So they brought in help. Dr. Lee Gilbertson, criminal justice professor, profiling expert, gang specialist. He saw what Gannon and Duarte feared. This wasn't a single killer. This was a coordinated effort. Gilbertson believed in clusters, organized cells, killers working in tandem, sharing information, maybe on the dark web, maybe through encrypted messages, but they were talking to each other, and they were careful, too careful. He called them a terror cell of serial killers, and he saw the victim type clearly: alpha males, smart, fit, high-achieving, young men who embodied success, the kind of person who might attract envy, resentment, obsession, and they were being picked off, one by one. Gilbertson studied the timing, too. Most disappearances occurred during breaks or holidays, times when campuses were quiet, when parties were louder, when young men walked home alone, and always near water. Water was the perfect weapon. It erased evidence, slowed decomposition, distorted timelines. Bodies that should have floated in days appeared weeks later, sometimes exactly where search teams had already looked. Planted, preserved, moved. Then came William Hurley, Boston, 2009. He left a hockey game to meet his girlfriend. She was on her way to pick him up. They spoke on a phone. He told her he was cold and asked her to hurry. He never made it to the car. Days later, his body was found in the Charles River. His phone's last ping? On the opposite side of town. Impossible unless he'd been transported. No bruises, no wounds. Just the same pattern. Gone. Then in water. Then written off as an accident. Even more disturbing was the case of Brian Schaefer. He walked into a Columbus bar. Security cameras confirmed it. There was one way in, one way out. He never came out. No exit footage. No sign of a struggle. No trace. How do you vanish from a locked room? By now, Gannon was certain. This wasn't a theory. It was a truth nobody wanted to hear. Because if there was a group of killers out there, smart, patient, calculating, they were using the perfect camouflage. Alcohol, water, youth, and the world didn't want to believe it. Police pushed back. Media mocked the theory. Too wild, too conspiratorial, too terrifying. But families believed. Grieving parents joined the cause, held vigils, shared stories, spoke out on national television. They wanted answers. And in nearly every case, near the discovery site, one last taunt. A smile, painted on a wall, etched into concrete, sometimes paired with arrows, XS coordinates, strange symbols no one could decipher. Were they signs? Messages? Claimed territory? Nobody knew. But one thing became clear. This wasn't over. Someone or some group was still out there, and they were choosing their victims carefully. To Gannon, every new disappearance wasn't just a case. It was a countdown, a warning. A smiley face on a wall wasn't a coincidence anymore. It was a promise. It was becoming impossible to ignore. The number of bodies was rising, the pattern more undeniable with each case. But what chilled Kevin Gannon and his team the most wasn't the victims. It was the silence. Police departments weren't connecting the dots. Or worse, they were deliberately choosing not to. Gannon had spent enough time in law enforcement to know the bureaucracy. Departments didn't talk. Jurisdictions kept to themselves. A drowning in Minneapolis had nothing to do with one in Boston, or so they insisted. But the team knew better. These weren't isolated tragedies. They were linked, connected by eerie precision and something darker that no one wanted to acknowledge. The system was failing these men, and someone or something was exploiting that failure. Gannon started to think differently, to operate like a hunter. He and Duarte mapped it all out: victims, dates, times, locations. They created heat maps, timelines, case breakdowns. The clusters were there, tight and ominous. Dozens of young men had disappeared within miles of one another, within similar time windows. The killers weren't just active, they were coordinated. Was it a syndicate, a network, or simply a horrifying coincidence of like-minded psychopaths? Dr. Gilbertson's theory gained traction, a nationwide network of killers. The team turned to the digital world. The dark web, encrypted apps, coded forums. Gilbertson believed the killers could be using anonymous online channels to communicate, platforms invisible to authorities, places where a fascination with death could flourish unnoticed. And the idea made too much sense. How else could different men vanish under similar circumstances, thousands of miles apart, but with the same signs left behind? Gannon looked back at the smiley faces. The symbol was universal, simple, innocent, but repurposed here as something far more sinister. Sometimes the faces were angry, other times dripping with red, sometimes accompanied by cryptic numbers, coordinates, time markers, victim counts. They couldn't crack the code, but the repetition meant something. There was intention behind the madness. And then came another case. Joey LaBoot, Columbus, Ohio, March 2016. A 26-year-old IT professional. He disappeared after a night at a local bar during a weekend event. Security footage showed him walking calmly down the hallway of the bar. Then nothing. 2 weeks later, his body was discovered in the Scioto River. An autopsy was inconclusive. No clear signs of trauma. Another drowning, they said. But Gannon noticed the timing, the similarities, and yes, the painted face. Faint, under the bridge. The pattern refused to stop. Some families were reaching out now, finding one another, forming groups online, building databases, comparing stories. What they found was disturbing. Victims had eerily similar online footprints. Many used dating apps, social media. Some had active Tinder accounts, profiles on Grindr or Facebook Messenger chats on the night they vanished. Were they being lured? It was possible. The theory that the killer or killers posed as potential dates or rideshare drivers gained traction. It explained how these men were separated from their groups, how they vanished without a struggle. And it would be so easy. A fake name, a friendly face, one offer to help, and gone. The GHB found in some toxicology reports added more weight. A drug so quick, so silent, it could incapacitate a victim within minutes. No struggle, no noise. Then they disappear. Sometimes for hours, sometimes days, sometimes weeks. It was the delay that haunted Gannon most. Bodies found long after searches had concluded. In places that had been combed repeatedly, divers came up empty-handed, only for the body to surface later, as if it had been placed there, held somewhere, stored. That possibility opened a darker door. The killers may have kept the bodies, preserved them, killed them elsewhere, then returned them to the scene. Serial killers who studied law enforcement tactics, who knew when the search would end, who waited before making their move. Methodical, patient, obsessive. And then there was the symbolism. Duarte began looking closer at the graffiti, not just the smiley faces, but the arrows, the strange shapes, the distorted faces with excess for eyes. One showed up more than once, a triangle inside a circle, a symbol often associated with chaos magic or fringe internet cults. Was it a signature? A gang emblem? A sick-in joke? They didn't know, but the consistency gave them chills. As the cases mounted, the media began to stir. Documentaries surfaced, podcasts dove into the theory. Some scoffed, others amplified it. The nickname took hold, the smiley face killers. Not everyone agreed. Police departments insisted these were accidental deaths. Coroners pointed to alcohol, slippery riverbanks, cold water, drunken misjudgment. But Gannon's team pressed forward. They had over 40 cases, all unsolved, all with bizarre similarities. They weren't trying to scare the public. They were trying to warn them. Because if they were right, it meant young men across America were at risk. It meant someone was watching, waiting. It meant the next victim was already walking toward the trap. The authorities wouldn't listen. So Gannon went to the public. Interviews, Press releases, conferences. He begged people to stay aware, to stay in groups, to stay sober when walking near water. But it felt like yelling into a void. The system couldn't see the connections. Or wouldn't. Because admitting the theory meant admitting failure. It meant there might be a predator or predators that law enforcement hadn't caught. Worse, that they hadn't even recognized. The deeper the team went, the more complex the web became. Some reports hinted at surveillance. Victims who said they felt followed before vanishing. Men who made frantic phone calls, said someone was after them, and were gone hours later. The fear was palpable. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a crusade. And for Gannon, it was personal. Because every new body pulled from the water felt like a message. You can't stop us. You're too late. And always nearby, a grin. Painted. Mocking. The moment Gannon opened the folder, he knew something didn't fit. The victim, Brian Welsian, had vanished on New Year's Eve 2000 after a night out with friends in Chicago. His body wasn't discovered until 77 days later, washed up on a beach in Gary, Indiana, over 30 miles away. But here's the twist. The currents and water temperature should have brought him to shore long before that. 77 days. That meant one of two things. Either the laws of nature had failed, or Brian had been somewhere else before he entered the water. Gilbertson leaned over the report. There's no decomposition, no bloating. His body doesn't look like it was in the water for that long. The autopsy showed he had been relatively intact. No obvious injuries. But the internal state of his organs didn't align with a 2-month immersion. In forensic terms, the timeline was off. Suspiciously off. But there was more. His blood alcohol level was inconsistent. It didn't reflect the amount he was seen drinking, nor did it support the idea that he'd stumbled drunk into Lake Michigan and somehow floated 30 miles. Gannon checked the map again. You don't float from Chicago to Gary like this. Not by accident. And then Gilbertson found it. A smiley face. Faded. Red spray paint. Half buried on a storm drain pipe near the shore. Dismissed by locals as graffiti. But it was there. Again, this wasn't random. It was ritualistic. A message. Evidence was stacking up. Not just anecdotal stories, but patterns, symbols, timing. Other cases followed the same pattern. David Rogers in Ohio. Josh Shostak in New York. Chris Jenkins in Minnesota. Each man disappeared after a night of drinking. Each was found in a body of water. Each was surrounded by odd circumstances. In almost every case, their bodies were discovered in places that had already been searched. How does that happen? Gannon and Gilbertson dug deeper. They studied river flow rates, tide maps, cadaver recovery timelines. They spoke with oceanographers and rescue divers. The consensus was disturbing. Many of the recovery scenarios were impossible under natural conditions. Then came the toxicology reports. In several cases, victims had traces of GHB, not in recreational amounts, in sedative quantities, enough to immobilize, enough to control. This wasn't partying. This wasn't a bad night turned tragic. This was something else. The realization hit Gannon hard. Someone was orchestrating this. The public didn't know. The authorities didn't believe. And yet, the pattern was too precise. These weren't isolated incidents. They were chapters in a methodical, grim saga. Take Dakota James, Pittsburgh, a promising grad student. Last seen on security footage walking through a city alley. Smiling, sober, not stumbling or lost. Then gone. His body turned up 40 days later in the Ohio River. That river had been searched not once, not twice, multiple times. The water was shallow, visibility good. Dogs had combed the area. Nothing. And then he was there. He had ligature marks. Faint, almost missed, but they were there. Still, the ruling? Accidental drowning. It's like they're invisible, Gannon muttered, like ghosts moving in plain sight. But ghosts don't leave graffiti. Ghosts don't smash phones, cut surveillance, or wipe digital footprints. The more they uncovered, the clearer the picture became. This was organized, and if it was organized, who was behind it? The smiley face itself became a central obsession. It wasn't always the same. Some were simple yellow circles, others had blood-red eyes, horns. One even had an arrow through the head. Different cities, different states, but always the same calling card. Was it one person? A group? A movement? The possibility of a network emerged, dark, decentralized, and bound by ideology or thrill. Not unlike early cybercrime collectives or cult-like enclaves. The idea was chilling. What if there wasn't one smiley face killer, but many? A decentralized syndicate of predators. The internet had forums. The dark web had rooms. People shared fantasies, plans, maps. Some of these forums glorified violence. Others shared kill techniques. And some spoke about flood rituals. About sending them down the river. About cleansing the chosen. Gilbertson found one such post saved on a forum archive. The stars watch. The water carries. The face smiles. A poem? A threat? No one knew. But it made their blood run cold. They began reaching out to families. Mothers. Fathers. Siblings. People who had lived with loss for years. Some broke down in tears. Others were angry. We told the police something was off. They wouldn't listen. One mother remembered her son's watch was missing. When his body was recovered, it had reappeared on the wrong wrist. Small details, overlooked, but damning. Others recalled strange calls, hang-ups in the middle of the night, static on the line, an eerie laugh. Still, the evidence was circumstantial. Patterns, not proof. The authorities refused to act. So, Gannon, Gilbertson, and Duarte documented everything. They built an encrypted database, logged GPS coordinates, timestamps, symbols, autopsy contradictions, psychological profiles. What emerged was horrifying. Similar victimology, disappearances in proximity to water, smiley face graffiti near dump sites, inconsistent or missing toxicology tests, body recoveries in previously searched zones. All of it pointed to one chilling conclusion: someone or something was manipulating reality, turning murder into accident, rewriting the end of each story. They didn't just kill, they vanished people, made them ghosts, then returned them, washed, altered, and silent. And the smiley face? It wasn't just a tag. It was a signature, a laugh in the face of justice. By now, Gannon and his team had reviewed more than 80 cases. 80 young men, 80 supposed accidental drownings. But what haunted them most wasn't just the bodies. It was the timeline, the missing hours. In nearly every case, there was a blank stretch of time between the last sighting of the victim and the discovery of their body. Sometimes days, sometimes weeks. The police chalked it up to the body drifting downstream or not surfacing right away. But Gannon had seen enough water recovery cases to know the truth. These men hadn't been in the water the whole time. Something else had happened. In 2006, William Hurley, a Navy veteran, left a Bruins game in Boston. He called his girlfriend, told her he was tired and wanted to go home. She asked for his location. He gave it. Then the call cut off. Hurley's phone was found smashed nearby. His body was discovered 6 days later in the Charles River. The area had already been searched. He had bruises on his face, a black eye, scratches on his hands. And yet the official cause of death? Drowning. Gannon stared at the file for hours. Someone had hurt him. Someone had dumped him. But someone had also erased the evidence. Gilbertson compiled a map. Every city, every victim, every symbol. It looked like a spider web, each point connected by unseen threads. The pattern wasn't just national. It was calculated. The team began analyzing digital footprints, Snapchat locations, Instagram timestamps, Uber records. They started to piece together what the police had missed. Take the case of Tommy Booth. January 2008, Pennsylvania. He was out celebrating a friend's birthday. Surveillance footage shows him stepping outside for air. Then nothing. He disappears. The bar had cameras, but during the exact time Tommy left, the footage glitched, skipped, as if someone had tampered with it. His body was found behind the bar in a creek 2 weeks later. but that area had been searched multiple times, even by cadaver dogs. Tommy's friends reported strange behavior leading up to his disappearance. He thought someone was following him. Coincidence? Or had he been marked? The team's attention turned to the idea of targeting. These weren't crimes of opportunity. They were strategic, tactical. So, who were the targets? Young, fit, intelligent, popular, almost always male, almost always white. Many were athletes, scholars, rising professionals, and nearly all were last seen drinking. The theory took a darker turn. Were the killers using substances to subdue their victims? Toxicology reports were often inconclusive. Either the bodies were too decomposed or no tests were done. But in the few cases with viable data, strange things emerged. Low alcohol levels, despite witnesses claiming the victim had been drinking heavily. Traces of GHB, the so-called date rape drug, in at least 4 cases. It didn't make sense, unless someone was drugging them. Gilbertson proposed an even grimmer theory. These men were being abducted, held, possibly tortured, then killed and dumped, with the drowning staged to cover up the crime. The idea was horrifying, but it matched the evidence. The broken phones, the smashed watches, the clean, intact bodies that shouldn't have looked so preserved. One victim, Patrick McNeil, had lividity marks, pooling of blood, that contradicted the police's timeline. It suggested he had been lying flat after death, somewhere dry, before being placed in the river. This wasn't speculation. This was forensic contradiction. Gannon brought this up with several retired detectives. All agreed something was wrong. But without official support, all they could do was dig deeper. They contacted medical examiners, begged for second opinions, reanalyzed autopsy photos. In several cases, the angle of bruises suggested restraint. Ligature marks, signs of holding or dragging. But every time they tried to reopen a case, they were blocked. Jurisdictional red tape. Legal dead ends. Still, families began to listen. Parents of victims formed an informal network. They shared notes, photos, phone records, diaries. Some reported receiving anonymous emails after their children disappeared. Others found strange files on laptops, deleted messages recovered with data forensics. One father found a file named Final Trip to JPG. It was a corrupted image file with a single visible shape, a crudely drawn smiley face. It wasn't just a symbol now, it was a brand. Gannon theorized the smiley face marked the kill zones. Or perhaps it was left as a message, like a calling card, and each one seemed slightly different. Some had devil horns, some had excess for eyes, some had wide, cartoonish grins. Some were painted on walls, others etched into metal. One was found carved into the bark of a tree near a body site in Wisconsin. It was deliberate. They were taunting anyone looking closely. Then came the emails. An anonymous sender began contacting Gilbertson. The messages were vague, taunting. You're getting warmer. They aren't what you think. Drown the noise. They traced the IPs. Bounced through multiple countries. Untraceable. But whoever it was, they were watching. And then they stopped. No more messages. Just silence. The team took it as a warning. Were they getting too close? One night, Gannon's car alarm went off at 3:12 a.m. Nothing was stolen, but his dash cam had been disabled. A week later, Gilbertson's laptop was remotely wiped. The team went dark. No more press. No more interviews. They worked underground, quietly collecting data, preparing a new report, because what they had now wasn't just suspicion. It was a body of evidence. Multiple deaths, multiple missing hours, multiple messages left behind, and a chilling overarching theme. Someone was orchestrating these drownings, and they wanted the world to believe it was all just bad luck. But it wasn't luck. It was method, to be continued.